Hi there everybody, I'm David and I've been a Dragon Quest fan since I was 7 years old, whenever I first played the game back in 1989, and I've played every single game in this series, every iteration, remake, remaster, and port as well. So I've lived with these games for a very long time, and because of that, I do want to be clear about something right at the start. If you started playing Dragon Quest series with the HD 2D remakes of 1, 2, and 3, and you're expecting Dragon Quest 7 Reimagined to be like more of the same, then you need to reset that expectation immediately, because Dragon Quest 7 is a completely different beast. It's not just like more Dragon Quest, it approaches the pacing, structure, storytelling, and even player engagement in a very different way. So today, I want to explain exactly why Dragon Quest VII is just so drastically different from Dragon Quest 1, 2, and 3, and why understanding those differences matters before you decide to play it. And if you enjoy discussing Dragon Quest just like I do, then I'd really appreciate it if you come on and join our party and level up with me. Thank you so much for your sub, your like, and your hype. It helps me out a ton. And now let's go ahead and talk about why Dragon Quest VII Reimagined stands apart so much from the original trilogy. The first three Dragon Quest games were made in the 1980s. They came out in Japan in 86, 87, and 88 back for the original NES. And these were like the great granddaddies of role-playing games, setting the foundation for nearly everything that followed. They established the turn-based combat, the random encounters, and that massive world map that you could explore almost immediately. In fact, in the original Dragon Quest, there was literally nothing at all stopping you from traveling from the very first town to the very final town right at the beginning of the game, if you really wanted to. All you needed was an absurd amount of luck and determination to survive that high-level monsters along the way, because otherwise, they'd be kicking your ass. Dragon Quest 2 and 3, they did follow a similar philosophy, though they were a bit more structured at the beginning of the game until you attained the ship. But once you did, the entire world really opened up. You could then tackle the towns, the dungeons, and the challenges in nearly any order that you wanted, and your characters would level up and gain new spells and abilities purely based upon their level. It was pretty straightforward and basic in a sense, but it was also extremely fun, with very little extraneous fluff getting in the way. You collected the crests in the first two games, then you hunted down those orbs in the third, and you eventually made your way to the final boss to defeat them, as any good dragon warrior should. However, that approach simply just does not apply in Dragon Quest VII. 7 Reimagined does not follow that formula at all. It is a completely different beast, a completely different experience, and you definitely do need to be prepared for what you're going to be getting into here. Now, the first major difference is just like how much more dialogue heavy this game is. It expects you to talk to all the NPCs, investigate all the towns carefully, and piece together what is actually happening. In the first 3 games, though, you could pretty much largely ignore all the NPCs if you wanted, just kind of go on into town, grab your equipment, and then head on off to the next dungeon, collect whatever item that you needed, and move on. But again, that doesn't work here, because 7 is filled to the brim with a whole bunch of sequence triggers that have to be completed before you're allowed to progress. This also ties into the game's famously slow opening, and while it isn't as extreme as the original, where it was like 3 hours before you got into your first battle, like no joke, no exaggeration, I lived it, it was like 3 hours. This Reimagined still takes around 45 minutes before you fight anything at all, and if that sounds a little bit on the slow side, yeah, it probably should. It's a clear signal of what kind of experience this is going to be. Dragon Quest VII is significantly longer than the first 3 games, often like 2 to 3 times the length of a typical playthrough. And the world structure, also completely different. Whereas in the first 3 Dragon Quest games, you had traditional overworld maps, complete with underworlds and ocean travel, Dragon Quest VII uses a structure that's actually really unique here. You don't see the full world at the beginning of the game. In fact, the world kind of barely exists at all. All you have is an island, your home island, Astard, and every other landmass has been sealed away by the Dark Demon Lord. But you don't know this. So in order to restore the world, you have to travel into the past and resolve the problems that caused each island's disappearance. In the present day, where you start off, the world is peaceful. Monsters aren't roaming the land, there are no random encounters, and everything appears calm and orderly. Yet you're still expected to explore that present, to speak with the townsfolk, to buy new equipment, and to search for new land shards that allow you to travel into the past and restore more of the world. Most of the combat and danger takes place in the past, though, where the monsters still terrorize the land and darkness remains unresolved. And once you understand what went wrong and you help resolve those issues, then that dark world, that island, is restored in the present. As a result, Dragon Quest VII is far more linear in structure than the original trilogy, and you're often required to explore towns and sometimes even dungeons twice. First in the past, and then once again when it was restored in the present. So that's just something to keep in mind. Also, time. Time was largely static in the first 3 games. You had a day and a night system, but nothing really changed. But here, things change. It plays a much major role. Entire civilizations can rise and fall between eras, giving this a historical weight that the original trilogy never really attempted and that no other Dragon Quest game really attempted either. Combat also works really differently here. Yeah, it's still turn-based, but encounters aren't random. Enemies appear directly on the field, allowing you to choose whether to fight them or to avoid them. And while you still gain your experience and your gold, like in the earlier games, in Dragon Quest VII you also earn vocational points, which are used to progress through the job classes. Now, if you did play 3, you know that job classes were there too, but they were also relatively simple. You just kind of selected them at the beginning of the game at Louisa's place, and they leveled up normally and naturally alongside your other characters, and then later on in the game, if you wanted to, you could change the jobs over at the Dharma Temple. In Dragon Quest VII, though, the system is far more involved. For the first several islands, you don't have access to jobs at all. You start with one, but that's it. It's not like you can change anything. But once you do reach All Trades Abbey, the entire system opens up. From there, kind of like in Final Fantasy V and other job class-based games, you can switch between the jobs, combine the skills, and eventually unlock intermediate and advanced classes. And this there makes character growth far more flexible than it ever was in the original trilogy. Because back then, your progression was rigid and kind of predetermined. If you chose a warrior, you got all the warrior abilities and that was it. Here though, you can actively reshape your party and adjust your job classes to fit different situations and different playstyles. The story itself is also fundamentally different. Dragon Quest 1 through 3 are kind of like mythic, fairy tale-like RPGs. You're the chosen hero, and you're off to defeat the Dragon Lord, or stalk Hargon, or save the world from Zoma. Dragon Quest VII doesn't really follow that story at all. Instead, it's really episodic. You travel from island to island, restoring each one through its own self-contained tragedy. Rather than focusing on a simple good versus evil conflict, instead you're dealing with doomed villages, generational hatred, class oppression, religious fanaticism, and just quiet despair. The primary antagonist isn't immediately clear. In fact, it could take upwards of 80 hours before the game fully reveals who the real true villain actually is. And the dungeon design also reflects this shift. Because in the first 3 games, the dungeons, much like the story, pretty straightforward. The primary challenge just came from navigation and surviving the random encounters and the mazes. Dragon Quest VII though, very different. There's frequent puzzles. You'll be pulling levers, raising and lowering water levels, moving blocks and building ladders. It challenges your brain in ways that no other Dragon Quest entry really did before. At its core, Dragon Quest 1, 2, and 3 are NES-era RPGs built around random encounters, linear leveling systems, and open exploration. And they tell a story about becoming a hero in a world that needs saving, but Dragon Quest VII? Quite the opposite. It's a PlayStation-era RPG, with visible encounters, not random, and a flexible and open-ended leveling system, not just static, but it's set within a more controlled linear structure as far as going through the world, whereas in the NES games, you were open once you got the boat. And then rather than telling a story about becoming a hero, it instead tells a story about understanding a broken world and grappling with whether it can truly be saved at all. The villain here isn't always a monster. The damage isn't always reversible, and sometimes, even whenever you do succeed, the sadness remains, carrying forward into the present day. And that fundamental difference is why Dragon Quest VII feels so unlike the original trilogy, and why approaching it with the right expectations matters so much. It is a completely different beast, but not in a bad way. It's different in a good way, and I do hope that you enjoy it whenever it does come out. Thank you so much for watching, and I want to hear from y'all. What are your experiences with this game? Let me know in the comments, and as always, have a good day.